Welcome to the Parenting in the Digital Age podcast. Many parents are concerned that their child might be falling behind. Others are just looking for ways to help their children thrive, not just in the classroom, but socially, and well into their future careers. Each episode, we explore the challenges facing parents in the modern world, from behavior, education, and nutrition to device and gaming addiction. We interview a range of leaders in the area of childhood development to help you successfully navigate parenting in the digital age. Here is your host, Jamie Buttigieg.
Hello, parents, and welcome to another exciting episode of Parenting in the Digital Age podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Craig Polk, who works in developing products for communications and has a rich history of inspiring students. As part of great education programs such as IEEE University, Girl Scouts, Goals Ahead, VIPs, Greenlight for Girls, Junior Achievement, Young Science Achievers, I need to take a breath here, and take our daughters and sons to work. So just prior to all this, Craig and I were talking before we started rolling on the podcast, and in short, Craig's working a 9 to 5, but delivers tremendous impact to his community and communities around him through volunteering. So I'm very excited to dive into that. But Craig's really passionate about bringing opportunities to children of all backgrounds to enrich their lives through education. Now, on today's podcast, we are diving into the world of STEM education, digital education and digital divide education to underprivileged. I'll take a breath now. Craig Polk, welcome to the show, but please share with our listeners in your own words, what you do and what you are passionate about, please. Welcome.
Sure. Thanks for being able to get that introduction out in only a couple of breaths. I know it's a mouthful. So thanks, Jamie, for having me on the show. Looking forward to talking about these topics with you. So if I really had to sum up, what I do in my own words, I pretty much strive every day to help save lives, bring joy to people, and inspire the future. So there's a couple ways that I do that, but most of my focus is on education, specifically STEM education, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So when I was growing up, I had this vision of how I was going to be a famous sports athlete. I was really big into ice hockey, and luckily enough, I had a teacher who kind of challenged me on my thinking and said, "Hey, where are you going to go with this? How plausible is it? And do you have a backup plan?" And I really didn't have one. And I know that's difficult for a kid, who's around 13, 14, just getting into the end of their pre-university studies, of what they're thinking about in the future. But I was lucky enough to be challenged and kind of set me on a different journey and brought me to where I am today.
Yeah, fantastic. And so we talked a little before the show about Kids in Cleats. Do you want to start by telling us a little bit about that and your role there and the impact that you're making there?
Sure. Yeah. So Kids in Cleats is a United States nonprofit that predominantly uses soccer to help build communities one player at a time. So what I mean by building communities is we use soccer as a vehicle, or I should say football, as it's known throughout the larger majority of the world. In the United States, we like to coin that different soccer term. And we have a group of children in an underprivileged area in Africa, specifically in the country of Cameroon, where we teach them soccer skills, we teach them the benefits of teamwork, social skills, as well as different educational opportunities that they don't have. Kids in Cleats is a relatively new nonprofit. We just started in the early 2019, and shortly after we were had to deal with this global pandemic that went on, and being a organization that's headquarters in the United States and working in a overseas environment, of course, there was some new problems that we had to deal with because of that. But everybody kind of came together and we were able to get through a lot of those issues. And over the last couple of years, what we've done is we have now 78 students in our program, and we have our own athletic football field. And we're currently looking to break ground on a new computer and community center. So when earlier I mentioned about how we build up community to support a player, when you think about it, and Jamie, I don't know if you've ever played a sport before, so I guess I have to ask, your background in that. If you've when you were growing up, did you play any type of sport?
I did a fair bit of martial arts, which is an individual, but there is a team element to that. So yeah, I'll say yes.
Yeah. So for the people that have played any type of sports, individual or team sport, one of the things that happens to everybody is we get dehydrated, right? So if you think about all these things that go into playing a sport, and just looking at that one of dehydration, we have to come up with a solution of how do we provide water at our facility. So being able to construct a well and construct water outlets for people that are using the facility had then a community impact, because we were able to deliver water to some of the local houses in the community. So all of those kind of things like that, as we're building up our program, has more of an impact just past the like 78 students that we're working with.
Yeah, that's tremendous. You guys are delivering tremendous impact. And I like where it's going, this computer lab and introducing STEM. Let's talk about STEM for a second. So we know you've talked about science, technology, engineering, and maths, but now we're hearing things like STEAM and STREAM, and parents still ask me in our learning centres, what is STEM and what does it mean? And there's still not necessarily a wide understanding. Can you maybe give us some background as to what those things are, maybe how they're related, and maybe how they're not related, just for the benefit of our parent listeners?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. And I definitely hear that a lot with a lot of the outreach that I do for STEM. And as you mentioned, STEM has 4 major components in it: the science, the technology, the engineering, and the mathematics are its core concepts. And this idea of STEM education has been around for several decades. And what we've seen recently is the I want to say expanding of the acronym, right? So just to throw out 2 alterations of that, we have STEAM and STREAM. So what does that mean when we put an A in with STEM? So we've seen a more merging of arts into the science and technologies. So just to give you kind of an example of what that means is we've had this development using things like 3D printers to create unique works of art. We have a lot of artists now that are doing things through computer generated art, how other things such as machine learning, artificial intelligence comes into that, and what are some of the artistic components that are that revolve around the sciences. So we've seen this kind of expanding into to STEAM. And then the second one that I mentioned, STREAM, now adds an R component to that. So we build on the arts that we have, and then now you add such things as reading and literature, as well as communications. So for some people who may be watching this that grew up in a technical background, or now they have technical careers, you may have heard, this saying, which I heard a lot in my university, was you could be the smartest person in the world, but if you can't explain it to someone, your worth is going to be limited, right? So coming up with some great ideas, being able to not only just plan them and create something, but explain it to somebody else is a crucial piece to that. And then kind of an offshoot of that, we see other areas that are using the same acronyms, like the R, for example. We've seen it used as religion. So instead of bringing in the reading and the literature component and the communication part of it, there's this bringing of religion and sciences together. So depending on what the, I almost want to say, use case of it, what the specific school or organization is doing, you'll see a little bit of differences that are in there on how they approach it, but the main science, technology, engineering, and mathematics is still the core to it. And sometimes, you can have STEM programs that bring in the arts and bring in literature and communication, but they may not change the acronym. So it's almost like a marketing tool in some way. And depending on who you talk to, people have preferences over which name they prefer to use.
Yeah, that's great. I wish we'd always just decide on one and have
Yeah.
a uniform approach. Like our learning centers are coding and STEM. We call them STEM, but the reality is it is really STEAM. It does incorporate a bunch of other elements. Like, for instance, when we do a YouTube video maker camp, there are artistic elements. There are creative and artistic elements. When we do you said 3D printing, even coding. Some of the guys are coding games and designing animations and art to go in behind that, helping kids build that healthy relationship with technology, but also help them, become digitally literate, because that's where we're headed next. And I suppose is a nice segue to our next question. Why is digital education so important for our kids?
Well, just to be kind of honest, technology is everywhere, right? How we're communicating through this use of the video meeting. This was not really possible, when I grew up, or even just if we look at it in a shorter time frame, even 5 years ago, this wasn't really used for being able to communicate across the world, right? So we talked without video. And then if you back up even before that, you would have issues with long distance calling and the cost involved in it. Calling from United States to Australia would usually limit, what's the focus, what's the conversation, because there was a cost piece of it. And so as the technology is developing, it's bringing in more tools and opportunities, reducing costs so that more people can do things really easy, like meeting and being able to share ideas and share information. And they have this saying that information is power, and our education systems are all built around understanding and learning as much information as you can. So as the technology is allowing for these greater avenues to get access to information, our education systems have to evolve into using technology more and more, or there's going to be a large amount of information that's not available. And as our society continues to use this information, and it really shrinks the world, and by making the world smaller, our children, they have to adapt and be able to learn things in a different way. Learn things, it's faster. When we think about classes that I had when I was younger, some of them I didn't take until I was in university. And I see my children now that are in high school or even middle school, taking these classes. You give the great example of coding, right? Like I didn't have my first computer until I was 18 years old. And nowadays in like developed economy areas, children have they're almost born with the computer, right? So they come out and there's just all these computers everywhere around them. Screens are everywhere. And so as they adapt to this new environment, it's really important to understand what are the benefits of this tool that we can use to help our education system.
There's a lot to unpack there. In our own learning centers, we teach coding and STEM, and we believe that coding in particular and digital literacy as a whole is absolutely critical, because technology has brought us so much good. Okay, let me say that first. But there is also a crisis, right? There's also a technological crisis. There is an addiction that is occurring amongst our kids with social media. And you said it right there, they were born with it. I was having coffee this morning and there was a parent sitting with, maybe a 10-month-old baby for all intents and purposes. And this mother, had the baby in a trolley in the supermarket and was sitting down drinking a coffee, turned away from the baby just on a phone. Now, these kids are going to model that behavior. Mm-hmm. And, this is, first of all, it's a parental responsibility here. I don't even know where I'm going with this. This is just a bigger conversation to unpack. But I guess, really, we have a responsibility as parents and educators to help our kids understand the language of the next generation and to give them access to the tools and technology, as well as the work you're doing to help the underprivileged and the marginalised and disadvantaged in the world have access to the same tools as well. What was interesting is that I was about a couple of months ago, I was playing golf very, very badly with our internet service provider. And I was talking about how we could get our students into pathways and to, doing internships and things within their organisation. And he turned to me and at first I was really angry with the response. I was really frustrated with the response. He said, Jamie, all of our, IT graduates and all of our programmers and IT support come from Ukraine. And I'm like, I'm furious. Like, I'm all about how do we help our kids at home? We've got enough challenges here. And he said something which you've already touched on here, and that is, there are countries out there that are really focused on digital learning and digital literacy. I mean, there are teachers and schools in Australia where they are scared to implement this sort of stuff because they just don't have the knowledge or the resources, right? We still don't have a good coding curriculum in many schools in Australia. And, when you look at what COVID's done to the world, it's brought, you've said this, it's brought us closer together. We're a lot smaller. And now organizations, our kids are no longer, like my kids just aren't competing with the kids next door. My kids are now competing with your kids and the kids in Ukraine and the kids in China, because organizations, with the help of COVID, have figured out how to do business more remotely and how to do business, with people working from home. And before they were quite reluctant to do that, which means they will now hire the people that are better educated, have a better work ethic, right? And those that will probably work for less, because let's face it, there's an economic factor there with organizations getting squeezed in other fronts. They're going to try and save money on staff and overhead. So I think our kids are in trouble. Maybe the US as well, but certainly within Australia, because we're not keeping up. So I guess maybe I'll stop talking for a minute, because this is a podcast and it's supposed to be an interview. How do you see digital literacy and digital and virtual education evolving in the future? Is this something that parents should be more or less concerned about? But like, where do you see this whole digital learning thing going?
Yeah, that's definitely a tough question to unpack. And I'll give you also a good reference point for in the United States. So on the onset of COVID, when everyone moved to hybrid or remote working, one of the things we saw as workers came back was the organizations and corporations that previously said, hybrid models don't work, remote models don't work, so it's impossible to be as effective in your schooling or in your job if you're not in the building, right? And that kind of forced us into a little experiment. And as people were having the opportunity to come back to the office and maybe didn't want to, we've seen corporations in the United States look for areas such as, you mentioned Ukraine, Philippines is one, China and India are also large powerhouses for having access to technology and a really large workforce that is trained for specific functions and specific roles. So it does kind of change the playing field where, you're competing with the person who's sitting next to you, but now competing to someone who's, worlds away, right? On the other side of the globe. So it definitely does change how things are approached. And so there's definitely a concern there that hasn't really been addressed in a lot of countries. And so in areas like Australia and areas in the United States, it is a definite concern, because you wonder, what are going to be the available jobs in countries like, we'll just say that, have a rich economy, right? What are the job availabilities going to be in countries that have a rich economy, when now they're competing for spots in such a big, diverse global economy scale that we've never had before, right? So to look at things where, we wouldn't have to compete in, say, an economy that was underperforming because they didn't have the means to the technology, right? They didn't have the means to get to these types of jobs, but now they do. And so, it changes kind of the playing field, and it makes us have to revamp what we know about education and what we learn. So there's definitely going to be a need to learn a lot more specifics, right? So some educators talk about how, okay, the shift in education is going to be very much on the specific, right? And you see this in some areas in Europe already, and it's been a foothold in the education system in Europe before, where everyone goes to some basic, university, and then once they figure out what they do, they have specific universities for, like, for coding, for medicine. Everything becomes specialized, because the only way you're able to compete is through unique characteristics and unique set of skills that you have. So in the United States, we don't have that as much. There's a lot of general areas of study. I'm not sure how the university is in Australia, if it's along the same thing. And when I say that there's not a lot, I don't mean that there's none, right? So we have, nursing schools, we have, medical schools, engineering schools, but on the whole, in the United States, I believe it's close to 90% of students actually make it into some type of post education, either in university or other trades. So it's a real high number. So there was already a lot of competition here in the United States, but then we see things and I'll take the example in Africa, right? So because of the technology in Africa, it's just coming in, right? And there's such a humanitarian effort there, because organizations such as the UN that go into these places, they talk about, okay, well, what separates these poor economies from bigger economies? And one of the things today is how they handle technology and what kind of technology they have available. So, and just to give like for example, one of the schools we're working with in Cameroon, they had a computer course that they gave, and we had somebody from our organization out there that went there to kind of like audit the course and see what it was like. So they were going through a Windows 7 and a Windows 8, like real old, software compared to what it is now. We're at 11. So it was a couple years past, but there wasn't a single computer in the room. They were talking about it on a chalkboard, right? And this school didn't even have lights, right? They didn't have power. They didn't have electricity. But they still understand the importance of, they have to teach these kids what a computer is, because they have to know this to be able to compete. So they're at like a huge disadvantage. But as we're seeing more technology come out and that price of technology is going to drop, these students that don't have access to any of these education materials, they're going to start getting it because they're going to start having devices. Now, that doesn't mean they will be taught by, African teachers. There's a huge possibility that the trend is going to be, they're going to have remote teachers from the US, from Australia, from Britain, from other parts of Europe. So, one of the things that has been predicted is we may see more wealthy societies and economies changing their structure, that they just build up other economies, right? So so not as much creating is going to be done or not as much manufacturing is going to be done because it costs a lot here, right? It costs a lot to have an Australian coder. It costs a lot to have a factory in Australia or in the US or in Great Britain, but they can do those same setups in Africa, right? And they can have the workforce specifically there. And then they can have the educators, the managers, things like that virtually tie in. So the education system is trying to grapple with that, and like, what does that mean for instructing, right? And it's a really tough question, and it's a tough like political parts come in, because there's concerns about moving workforces outside of the country. What does that mean to the local economy? And in the grand scheme of things, you could look at this in different ways, where you say, okay, well, because there's this large digital divide, right? There's this, big difference between people who have things and people who don't have things. You're going to expect the people that are on the bottom area to come up, right? And that's going to happen both in education and their knowledge and their access. But as that's happening, one of the things, we don't really like to talk about is that the people that are already up here, they're going to come down. So there's this big scare and worry about countries that are more developed already. What does that mean to them? As they drop down, how do those societies deal and those countries deal with that drop, right? There's concerns of unemployment, what happens to the future workforce. And that hasn't really been addressed yet. It's a lot of conversations going on around that. So some of the things we're trying to do in Kids in Cleats is we're trying to understand, what does that look like for underdeveloped countries, right? How are they learning this? How are they bringing their education systems in, right? So there's organizations like us, they come in, and we have some concern about I'll use the term shady, like not trustful areas that they come in, right? And they build things up and they create these schools because they're looking to make money, right? And then they go away, and then the institutions like fail. But in the past, those failures of institutions really only impacted that local area. But now, as the local area is growing on more of a global scale, it's going to have ripple effects to people that were supporting that, right, as well. So we have to make sure, as we're building those institutions up, we kind of watch how much impact other societies are pulled down, because at one point we all really want to meet in the middle, right? We want to have this global standard of life where people have, they have life, they have education, they have a easy means of survival. And but at the same time, we don't want to impact the future education of other students that are already, at a very manageable area right now. So I don't really know if that answers your question, or if I started going off on like a tangent on the side. But yeah, it's a difficult question. It's a difficult problem to look at. And one of the things why we're trying to also we also educate inside the United States of different schools. So we'll go to schools and we'll like connect them with some of the students in Cameroon, and for some of them it's like kind of eye-opening, right? They see when we can get internet connections there, and when we can actually host like a Zoom call, like or some other type of video call. And the students in the US, they see, oh, wait a minute, you guys have benches, you don't have desks, some of you are sitting on the floor, you don't have electricity in your school. And one of the students we were at in a school, when we mentioned, oh, they don't have electricity, we have to bring in like solar power, they don't have electricity there. And they mentioned, oh, well, we have school closures anytime we have power outages. So if we had a power outage in a United States school, they close the school and they send everybody home. And in some parts of the world, that's never a concern because they don't even have power to begin with. So it's yeah, there's many points to go over, and I'm sure we could talk about this for a really long time. And you know, I know your listeners and your viewers, they have concerns. Different groups have other concerns. So we're hoping we can play a part in trying to, you know, better not only people overseas and in poor economies and help them with their education issues, but also some, you know, here locally. And just to kind of give you like a for example of some institutions that are doing that while they're trying to help lower economy areas, and there's a benefit to everyone. I'll give you an example of MIT. So it's Massachusetts Institute of Technology. So it's a famous engineering school here in the United States. And they were one of the first ones to start this open university campus that's done 100% online. It's 100% free. So you can have access to a lot of the same training courses that you would get for thousands and thousands of dollars, but you know, you don't have access to students, you don't have access to the staff, but you have access to the material. So you're able to learn, you know, if you've, you know, never had the opportunity and you wanted to think about, okay, well, is engineering something I wanted to go into? Instead of starting a school and, you know, wasting, wasting, you know, using all this extra thousands of dollars where you could buy a car, you know, instead of a school education, they have a chance to sample almost different courses, and they can understand, all right, well, what do I want to go into? What am I passionate about? Where do I think I can kind of be helpful? And a lot of these courses now that are done in the United States, there's also this focus on bringing other things in on a, I want to say a more of a philanthropy type aspect to it, where, you know, hey, making money is not just everything. You know, as you grow up, you know, you have to realize as you're getting into university that it's really just not all about making money, because how money is made is going to change, right? And so there's this different aspect of what's impact do you have in your local communities and globally that really has to be taught now. And some universities have jumped on board on this, some countries have jumped on board on this, and others are a little slower to do this. And but I think that's a trend where things are going to go. There's, you know, courses are just going to be taught more with, hey, there's more involved to a business, or there's more involved to your career of just what you can do or how it can benefit you, but how it can benefit others. And we're seeing this ripple down into lower education levels. We hear about social and emotional learning. We hear about emotional intelligence. These are all things that we didn't have like really a decade ago, or maybe even less in a lot of the schools that we're in now, but they're really important. And it's really gonna kind of shape how education will impact business and corporations in the next decade.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be interesting to see it all evolve. I'm certainly a big believer, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that face-to-face learning, you know, yields some really beneficial learning outcomes. But I'm also a believer in giving access to education for all. And you know, to that extent, you know, if there's ever anything we can do, Skill Samurai, to get our educators to, you know, partner with your organisation to provide some time to teach some of these classes. If they've got access to the equipment, let's stay in contact, because we'd love to be able to help and give access to, you know, coding and STEM curriculum to those kids who otherwise don't have access to it. Now we can certainly go on for a lot longer, but we need to kind of wrap this up. So let's change the note a little bit. Let's talk about something a little lighthearted. One question I like to ask all of our guests as we conclude and round off our podcast episode is, you know, if you had a time machine, if you could go back and give your 10-year-old self one piece of advice, Craig, what would that piece of advice be? share with our listeners?
Well, oh wow, that's a great thought-provoking question. If I had a DeLorean, I don't know, Back to the Future is one of my favorite movies. So if I had a DeLorean and I could, get up to speed and travel back in time and see myself when I was 10, I think one of the things I would tell myself is something that I tell a lot of kids that are program mentors now, is that don't be scared to do something small. And what I mean by that is when I was growing up, sometimes there were things that I didn't do because I thought it wouldn't have an impact, or I thought it didn't mean anything, right? So if you think about it from like a school level, there's always the big project, there's always the big final exam, there's the big test. So you do a lot of studying on that because the bigger the test, the bigger the impact, right? And sometimes we won't do participate in class, we won't answer a question, we won't do a homework because we think it's small and we don't really think it's gonna do anything. But how we teach that through our program is to kind of expand on it, not just about, well, if you do that one homework assignment, or when you're doing homework, if you do one extra question, right? And then you do that every day and you look at it over a month, a year, all of a sudden that's extra 100 questions, right? That you went through, that you learned. And if you kind of redirect that a little bit away from just studying and instead helping people, right? Sometimes, we won't say hello to somebody because it's either we think it's not going to mean anything, right? We're like, oh, it's just a quick word. I won't pick up somebody's book or paper because maybe they dropped it. They only dropped one thing. If a student is looking around and they're confused, oh, they'll find their way. There's other staff there. If I help them find their class, it doesn't really make a big impact. And sometimes a lot of students now, they're really focusing on what's the big impact, right? Like what club do I join? What sport do I do? What classes do I take that's going to have the most amount of impact? And we try to tell them, hey, you should stop in, even if it's a club on music, on art, and even if it's for one day, even if it's not going to be something you do for a whole year, don't be scared to try something small. Because, when you try something small, sometimes there's a ripple that comes from it. You might ignite something that you didn't think was a passion of yours. You might be able to help somebody in what you thought was meaningless, but that other person thought was a big thing. So, when you see something from a certain perspective, you have a chance of missing other things if you don't take the time to just try it. And even if it's only for a few minutes. So don't be scared to try the small stuff. And I know there's that saying that, don't sweat the small stuff, that we say, don't care about it, be focused on the big things. But, life is made up of all these little small pieces, and you don't have to really stress over those small pieces, but you shouldn't also skip over them.
Yeah, that's actually quite profound. Those small things are important. I often try and teach my kids to, or one of the things I say to them is, how can you be 1% better than you were yesterday? How can you grow 1% more? How can you give 1% more? And if you practice that over 100 days, you've grown yourself 100%, and just, continue that. Just look for those little pieces of growth, those little opportunities in life to contribute. And that's something you, Craig, have certainly done in spades, and I admire the work you guys are doing and your generosity. So thank you. For those listeners who want to perhaps connect with you, or Kids in Cleats, if they've connected with your message today, where can we find you online, or how can we get in contact?
So they can find us on social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Our website is our main hub. It's kidsincleats.org. There we have our phone numbers, our email addresses. So we're always looking for for people to partner with, people to just kind of spread the word. We have a lot of our information available in English and in French, since Cameroon's predominantly French speaking country. So that's the best places they can reach out and find more information about what we're doing, what we're about, and how we're trying to help our global education community.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I'll put all those contact details in the show notes today. Craig, thanks again for your time, your generosity. I know this will certainly impact many parents to come, those who come across our podcast over the coming years. And I hope we stay in contact. I'm sure we can do something together down the track.
Yes. And thank you so much, Jamie, for helping, parents learn about all these different aspects of education, what goes on in one area, different fields. And I think it's really important for parents to keep that conversation with their kids about their educations, their plans, their goals, and always just keep learning, right? Every day, try to learn something, an extra 1% or an extra one step. Just try to keep moving forward.
Absolutely. Craig, thanks again for your time, and bye for now. Cheers.
Bye. Cheers.
If you enjoyed the show, please connect with Jamie on LinkedIn or Instagram. You'll find links in the podcast description. Parenting in the Digital Age is sponsored by Skill Samurai, Coding and STEM Academy for Kids. Skill Samurai offers after-school coding classes and holiday programs to help kids thrive academically and socially while preparing them for the careers of the future. Visit skillsamurai.com.au.